March 10th, 2023. A woman steps onto a plane bound for Miami, her designer suitcase rolling smoothly behind her. The warm, humid air of the airport greets her as she checks her boarding pass, excitement humming beneath her skin. A message flashes on her phone, confirmation of her first-class seat. She glances at the time. It's early, just past 6 in the morning. The city is quiet, still asleep. Somewhere miles away, in a dimly lit apartment, a child stirs in her crib, reaching out instinctively for the one person who should always be there. The flight attendant smiles as the young mother settles into her seat. She accepts a glass of champagne, takes a slow sip, and watches the city shrink below her as the plane ascends into the sky. Miami waits. The beaches, the luxury, the life she has always wanted. This trip is different. It isn't just a getaway, it's an escape. A week of indulgence, the kind she's spent years chasing, the kind she's only seen in Instagram stories. The man waiting for her in Miami? A self-proclaimed crypto millionaire, a rising name in a world of fast money and faster living. The opportunity is too perfect, the temptation too strong. The apartment she left behind is silent now. No television murmuring in the background, no soft lullabies to break the emptiness. The door is locked. The blinds are drawn. No one knows what is happening inside. For 7 days, the world moves on. Laughter rings through the high-end clubs of South Beach. Glasses clink, cameras flash. Money is spent like it will never run out. The city shines. But miles away, beyond the neon lights and waterfront penthouses, something is happening. By the time anyone knocks on that locked door, it will be far too late. She was 22 years old, but in her mind, life had already passed her by. For as long as she could remember, she had been running from responsibility, from struggle, from the kind of life she had sworn she would never live. Her name? It didn't matter, not in the world she was trying to enter. What mattered was the image she created, the illusion of who she wanted to be. Growing up in Houston, she had learned early that survival wasn't about hard work. It was about playing the right game. Her mother had never played it well. A single parent, in and out of jobs, scraping by to keep the lights on. There were nights they ate cheap canned food by candlelight, not for the atmosphere, but because the electricity had been cut off again. School wasn't an escape. It was just another place where she felt out of place. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new episode. Here at Explosive True Crime Stories, we uncover shocking cases, mysterious disappearances, and mind-blowing investigations, bringing you the facts, the twists, and the truth. Got a case you want us to cover? Drop it in the comments. Your next obsession starts here. Fire subscribe now for the most explosive true crime stories. Other girls had new backpacks, brand-name sneakers, fathers who picked them up in cars with working air conditioning. She had hand-me-downs, second-hand shoes, and a mother who, despite her best efforts, was always one bad month away from eviction. By the time she was 16, she had figured it out. No one cared how smart you were. They cared how you looked, how you carried yourself, how much power you could convince them you had. She started watching the women who had mastered this, the ones who walked into rooms and turned heads, who always had someone else picking up the check, who never seemed to be touched by the same struggles that weighed down everyone else. The influencers. Social media became her new education. Every post was a lesson, every caption a blueprint. These women didn't work 9-to-5 jobs. They didn't stress about rent. They took pictures in designer outfits, sipped champagne on private jets, draped themselves in luxury like it was their birthright. And the men? They were rich, powerful, untouchable. This was the life she wanted, a life where struggle didn't exist. She started curating her image, shaping herself into the woman she believed she was meant to be. The right filters, the right angles, the right captions. She learned the language of the world she wanted to belong to: soft launches, luxury aesthetics, exclusivity. She didn't need a career. She needed access. And then, at 20, she got pregnant. It wasn't part of the plan. The man, he was a fleeting mistake, a name barely worth remembering. They had met at a party, exchanged numbers, spent a few months convincing each other that what they had was real. It wasn't. By the time she told him she was pregnant, He was already gone, another ghost in a city filled with them. She told herself this would be different. Maybe having a child would give her life meaning. Maybe it would fill the void she had spent years trying to outrun. For a brief moment, she believed it. Then reality hit. The sleepless nights, the crying that never seemed to stop, the weight of a life she was now fully responsible for. The world she had wanted, the luxury, the freedom, it felt further away than ever. She resented it. At first, she tried to balance both lives. She would take pictures of her daughter, dress her up in matching outfits, post about being a boy mom or a girl mom, depending on the angle she was selling that day. The likes poured in. The comments told her she was glowing, that motherhood suited her. But behind the screen, the reality was different. Motherhood wasn't soft pastels and photo-ready moments. It was exhausting, relentless. It was waking up to cries in the middle of the night, realizing she hadn't showered in days, feeling the walls of her apartment closing in around her. It was watching the women she once admired live the lives she had planned for herself while she was stuck inside, changing diapers and reheating leftovers. And then she found him. Jackson Cade, 26 years old, a self-proclaimed crypto millionaire. Though no one could quite trace the source of his wealth, he was exactly the type she had been looking for. Young, rich, reckless. His Instagram was a highlight reel of opulence. Penthouse views, six-figure cars, vacations that never seemed to end. Women surrounded him, draped over him in club booths, posing in his stories, tagging him in exotic locations. He wasn't just wealthy. He was the key to the life she wanted. She studied his posts, watched the kind of women he entertained. They were beautiful, polished, unattached. They didn't post about kids, about responsibilities, about anything that tied them to the mundane world she was so desperate to leave behind. If she wanted in, she had to be like them. She had to be unattached. So she made a choice. She sent a message. "You got a spot for me?" He replied within minutes. "Come to Miami." That was it. The door she had been knocking on for years had finally opened. No hesitation, no second thoughts. She packed her bags, booked her flight, her child. She told herself she'd figure out later. The days leading up to her flight passed in a blur, though she barely noticed. Every thought, every decision revolved around Miami. What to pack, what to wear, how to present herself. She had spent years watching women slip into luxury like it was their birthright. And now, finally, it was her turn. This trip wasn't just a vacation. It was her entry into the life she had always wanted. The kind of life where she didn't have to check her bank balance before ordering dinner, where she wouldn't be just another girl in a cheap apartment with overdue bills and a child tugging at her sleeve. She didn't second-guess her decision, not even when she looked at the small crib in the corner of the room. The baby monitor sat on the nightstand, its red light glowing faintly in the dark. Her daughter was asleep, curled up in her favorite blanket, completely unaware that her mother had already left her behind in her mind. At first, she considered asking someone to watch her, maybe a friend, maybe a neighbor. But each option came with a problem. Questions, judgment, conversations she didn't want to have. The last thing she needed was someone telling her what she already knew deep down, that this was wrong, that she was making a choice no mother should ever make. She hated feeling questioned, hated the way people looked at her when she took a break, when she dared to want something for herself. She was tired of being told that motherhood meant sacrifice. So she convinced herself of an easier truth. The baby would be fine. She wasn't abandoning her daughter. She was just taking a break, stepping away for a moment to catch her breath. She left a bottle of milk within reach, placed a few snacks nearby. Babies didn't need much. They slept most of the time, didn't they? Still, there was a flicker of doubt, a hesitation as she zipped her suitcase shut. A choice still remained. She could cancel the trip, stay home, wait for a better opportunity. But then what? Sit in that apartment while the world passed her by? Watch from behind a screen while other women lived the life she was supposed to have? No, this was her chance. And she wasn't going to miss it. She turned off the baby monitor. She didn't want to hear what she was leaving behind. 6 o'clock in the morning. The air outside was crisp, the city still wrapped in the quiet stillness of dawn. No neighbors stirring, no voices in the hallways. just the distant hum of traffic and the occasional streetlight flickering against the darkness. A black sedan idled at the curb, its engine soft, waiting. She pulled the apartment door shut, listening to the faint click of the lock. There was no hesitation, no second glance. She had already made her choice. The Uber driver greeted her with a polite nod as she slid into the back seat, adjusting the hem of her fitted dress. She tapped her phone screen. Her boarding pass was ready. Her flight was on time. A notification lit up. Jackson Cade. See you soon. A rush of excitement surged through her chest. This was real. She was going to Miami, to a world that felt untouchable just a few days ago. The driver glanced at her through the rearview mirror. Heading somewhere nice? She smirked, glancing at her reflection in the window. Yeah, you could say that. As the city blurred past, she barely noticed the quiet apartment complex fading into the distance. Inside that locked apartment, in the dim morning light, a child stirred. Small hands reached out, expecting warmth, expecting comfort, expecting the presence of the only person she had ever known. But the room was empty. At the airport, security was a breeze. She knew how to move through these spaces, confident, unbothered, like she belonged. First-class ticket in hand, designer bag on her shoulder. She walked past rows of exhausted travelers clutching cheap carry-ons, past the families wrestling with strollers and crying kids. That wasn't her life. Not anymore. Settling into her wide leather seat, she exhaled, the tension finally releasing from her shoulders. A stewardess offered her a glass of champagne. She accepted without a second thought. The bubbles fizzed against her lips as she took a slow sip, letting the reality of it sink in. This was it. She was finally on her way. Thousands of feet below, in a silent apartment, her daughter's cries had begun. Faint at first, then louder. There was no answer. The moment she stepped off the plane, the heat wrapped around her like a silk sheet, thick and humid, clinging to her skin. The Miami airport buzzed with energy, tourists in bright colors, business travelers moving with purpose, groups of women posing for pictures under the fluorescent lights. But she wasn't just another visitor. She was somebody now. Her phone vibrated. Jackson Cade. Cars outside. She adjusted her sunglasses, smoothing down the front of her dress before striding through the terminal. Outside, a black Escalade sat at the curb, a driver waiting at the door. No questions, no introductions, just a smooth nod as he opened the door for her. She slid inside, sinking into the cool leather seats, the city stretching before her like a world she was finally stepping into. Jackson was exactly as she had imagined. Dark sunglasses, a diamond-studded watch, a presence that commanded attention. He barely glanced at her before passing her a drink, something cold and strong. She took a sip, letting the burn settle in her chest. Long flight? He asked, a lazy smirk on his lips. Worth it, she answered. The drive through Miami was surreal. Palm trees lined the streets. Sunlight bounced off glass skyscrapers. The ocean glistened in the distance. Every block felt like a scene from a life she had been chasing. Luxury storefronts, rooftop bars, women stepping out of cars, wearing $1,000 heels. She belonged here. The hotel was beyond anything she had ever experienced. Floor-to-ceiling windows with an ocean view, marble floors that clicked beneath her heels, a private suite stocked with champagne and fruit she wouldn't touch. She set her bags down, turning slowly, taking it all in. This was her new reality. Her phone screen lit up as she opened the camera. She snapped a picture, perfect lighting, perfect angles. The caption, "First night in paradise." Miles away, the apartment remained silent. The baby had cried for hours, her voice raw, her tiny body exhausted. At first, she had reached for the crib's railing, expecting arms that never came. Then she crawled to the door, pressing her small hands against it, waiting for it to open. Nothing. She was hungry now, her stomach tight and aching. The bottle her mother had left was nearly empty. The snacks were still out of reach. The only sound in the apartment was the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the distant murmur of the city beyond the walls. Outside, a neighbor paused in the hallway. Something felt off. Had they heard crying earlier? It was hard to tell. People came and went, Mothers had bad nights, babies fussed. They hesitated for a moment, then kept walking. No one knocked. No one checked. Back in Miami, the night was just beginning. The restaurant was exactly what she had imagined. Candlelit tables, soft music, the air thick with the scent of grilled steak and expensive perfume. She sipped on a handcrafted cocktail, listening to Jackson talk about business, about investments, about things she didn't really understand but pretended to. He liked her. She could tell. The waiter brought the check, but Jackson didn't even look at it before sliding his black card across the table. Effortless wealth. The kind she wanted. The kind she had chased for years. After dinner, they walked along the water, his hand resting on her waist. She laughed at his jokes, tilted her head just enough to make him feel like she was hanging on to every word. It was easy, this game. She had been studying it for years. She felt her phone vibrate in her purse, probably a notification from Instagram. She didn't check. Inside the apartment, the cries had stopped. The baby was curled up in the corner now, small hands clutching the edge of a blanket, her body too weak to move. No one was coming. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the hotel suite, reflecting off the untouched champagne flutes on the nightstand. The sheets beneath Danica Rhodes were soft, expensive, and smelled faintly of citrus and linen. She stretched, blinking against the morning light, her body sore but satisfied. The night before had been everything she wanted. Drinks that never stopped flowing, the pulse of music vibrating through her chest, Jackson's hand on the small of her back as they moved through exclusive VIP sections like royalty. A silver cart sat near the bed, piled high with fresh fruit, pastries, and smoked salmon on delicate white plates. Room service. She grinned, pulling herself up and reaching for a golden croissant. This was it. This was the life she deserved. Jackson strolled in from the balcony, shirtless, scrolling through his phone. Without looking up, he tossed something onto the bed. A thick stack of $100 bills, wrapped in a crisp bank band. "Go have fun," he said. "Get yourself something nice." Danica's breath hitched for a moment. She had seen this happen before, on social media, in music videos, in the lives of the women she had idolized from a distance. Now it was happening to her. She picked up the cash, flipping through the bills, the weight of them foreign in her hands. She wasted no time. By noon, she was stepping into the first of many designer boutiques, the scent of leather and luxury thick in the air. Everything she wanted, she bought. The sales associates treated her differently now, offering champagne, bringing her the latest collections, flattering her with words she had always longed to hear. "You have such an elegant style." One of them cooed as she slipped on a diamond-studded bracelet. She had never felt more important. By the evening, her arms were weighed down with bags, Chanel, Gucci, Prada, labels she had once only admired through a screen. She barely glanced at the totals as she handed over the cash. The money wasn't hers, but that didn't matter. That night, she sat on a rooftop lounge overlooking the city, sipping on a $15 cocktail, her phone screen glowing as she scrolled through the pictures she had taken throughout the day. Her followers needed to see this. The world needed to see who she had become. She posted a photo, legs crossed, expensive heels gleaming under the soft glow of lanterns, a designer handbag perched beside her. Back home, the apartment was silent. The child had stopped crying hours ago. Her tiny body, once restless with hunger, now lay still. The bottle of milk was gone. The crackers Danica had left, long out of reach. Her breaths were shallow, her lips dry. There was no one to comfort her. No one coming to check. A neighbor paused outside the door. Something wasn't right. They hesitated, listening, trying to convince themselves that whatever they thought they heard wasn't worth the trouble. It wasn't their business. Danica raised her glass in a toast, laughing as Jackson whispered something in her ear. She didn't check her phone. She didn't think about home. She had everything she wanted, and she had no idea what it was costing her. The days in Miami blended together, late mornings in luxury suites, afternoons spent browsing high-end boutiques, and nights that pulsed with music and champagne. Danica Rhodes moved through it all with effortless ease, her new reality unfolding like a dream. This was what she had worked for, what she had envisioned for years. The escape from responsibility, the rejection of struggle, the life that other women only envied from behind a screen. Jackson Cade had made it clear. She was with him now. She saw it in the way club doors swung open without hesitation when they arrived, the way servers rushed to their table first, the way women looked at her with a mixture of admiration and resentment. She wasn't just another girl in Miami. She was someone worth noticing. Yet something had shifted. At dinner that evening, she noticed the way Jackson kept glancing at his phone, barely touching his plate. His laughter was more forced, his attention divided. When he excused himself for the third time that night to take a call, Danica felt the first flicker of unease. Still, she pushed the feeling aside. It wasn't her problem. Instead, she focused on the clinking of wine glasses, the hum of conversation, the weight of her diamond bracelet catching the candlelight. She had spent years clawing her way toward this life. She wasn't about to let small details ruin it. Meanwhile, in an apartment miles away, a child's body grew weaker by the hour. The heat in the room was unbearable, the air thick and unmoving. The milk bottle was long emptied, its plastic rim resting beside the crib, where tiny fingers had once grasped for comfort. Her cries had faded, replaced by soft whimpers, then silence. A neighbor stood outside the door, hesitation written across their face. Something was wrong. They had thought so for days now. The crying, then the absence of it. An eerie stillness seemed to hang in the air, pressing against the walls of the apartment. Should we call someone? Another tenant had asked earlier that evening, voice low with concern. I don't know, maybe the mom is just out. The excuses were weak, but they had been enough to keep them from acting. No one wanted to get involved. Until now. By the time Danica and Jackson left the restaurant, the mood had changed. Jackson was tense, barely speaking. His usual air of confidence had been replaced with something sharper, more alert. At the hotel, he poured himself a drink, pacing near the window, his phone screen lighting up over and over. Danica frowned, watching him carefully. You good? She finally asked, leaning against the plush sofa. Jackson exhaled sharply, muttering something under his breath before looking at her. We might need to cut this trip short. Danica blinked. Short? She had barely gotten comfortable, barely soaked in the reality of what her life had become. What do you mean? Jackson's jaw tightened. Just be ready. If I say we leave, we leave. She wanted to push for more, but before she could, his phone buzzed again. At the same time, in that dim apartment across the country, the neighbor finally made the call. A welfare check. Help was on the way. But was it too late? The apartment complex was silent, bathed in the dull glow of streetlights as two uniformed officers approached the door. Their boots echoed against the worn-out hallway tiles, their expressions unreadable. The neighbor who had finally made the call stood a few feet away, arms crossed tightly over their chest. I heard crying for days, they admitted, voice low. Then nothing. The officers exchanged a look before knocking sharply. Houston PD, welfare check. Silence. A second knock, harder this time. Still nothing. The lead officer reached for the doorknob and twisted. Locked. He exhaled, stepping back. We're going in. With a forceful kick, the door cracked open. A rush of stale air spilled into the hallway, thick and suffocating, carrying with it the undeniable scent of neglect. Inside, the apartment was eerily still. They stepped in cautiously, scanning the dimly lit space. Toys were scattered across the floor. An overturned sippy cup lay abandoned near the couch. The living room looked frozen in time, as if someone had simply stepped out for a moment. But the air told a different story. Then they saw her, curled up near the crib, her tiny frame barely moving. The child's breath was shallow, her lips dry and cracked. A discarded milk bottle lay inches away, long empty. She had stopped crying hours ago. She had stopped waiting. The younger officer dropped to his knees, fingers pressing against the child's fragile wrist. A beat of silence stretched between them before he exhaled sharply, reaching for his radio. Child located. We need paramedics now. Outside, the neighbor gasped, hands flying to their mouth. The lead officer turned, scanning the rest of the apartment. The kitchen counter was bare, no food, no supplies. The bedroom door was ajar, the bed still made. No signs of recent use. There was no mistake. The mother had been gone for days. Meanwhile, in Miami, Danica Rhodes was draped in silk, sprawled across a lounge chair on the balcony of the penthouse suite. The city sparkled below her, alive with music and movement. She stretched lazily, taking a slow sip of champagne. She had everything she wanted. Inside, Jackson Cade was moving differently, packing, quickly, efficiently. His phone calls had become sharper, his words clipped. She noticed but said nothing. Finally, she asked, "What's going on?" Jackson paused, his jaw tightening. "We need to leave." Danica frowned. "Leave? We just got here." He turned, his sunglasses sliding down his nose as he gave her a look that sent a ripple of unease through her. "Pack your bags," he said. "We're flying out tonight." Something was wrong. Danica hesitated, fingers tightening around her champagne glass. She wanted to push for answers, but before she could, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Where's your child?" Her stomach lurched. The officers in Houston were already making calls. By the time Danica realized what was happening, it was already too late. Danica Rhodes stared at her phone, the words burning into her vision. "Where's your child?" Her fingers trembled as she locked the screen, pulse hammering against her throat. Who sent that? How did they know? For the first time since arriving in Miami, a feeling crept in that she hadn't allowed herself to entertain fear. Jackson was still packing, stuffing designer clothes, watches, and stacks of cash into a duffel bag, moving with a sense of urgency she had never seen before. He barely acknowledged her. "Jackson," she said, her voice unsteady. "What's going on?" He didn't look up. "We're leaving. Don't ask questions." Danica swallowed hard. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. She had spent days wrapped in luxury, believing she had finally made it, that she was untouchable. But something was crumbling. Then came the knock at the door. It wasn't the polite kind. It was hard, forceful, demanding. Jackson froze mid-step, his eyes snapping toward the entrance. For the first time since she met him, he looked rattled. "Open up." A voice boomed from the other side. Federal agents, warrant in hand. Danica's stomach dropped. The door burst open before she could process what was happening. Armed men flooded the suite, badges flashing, weapons drawn. Jackson barely had time to react before he was shoved against the wall, cuffs snapping around his wrists. She shot to her feet, panic setting in. "Wait, A second set of hands grabbed her, forcing her arms behind her back. "Danica Rhodes, you are under arrest." Her vision blurred. For what? The agent didn't hesitate. Child abandonment resulting in critical endangerment. The room spun. No, this wasn't happening. As she was dragged toward the door, flashes of her last few days hit her like a series of brutal snapshots. The luxury, the shopping, the laughing, the drinking, and then a final, crushing image. Her baby, alone, hungry, weak. Somewhere in Houston, another officer was delivering an update over the radio. The child is alive, barely. Transporting to the hospital now. Danica barely heard it, because in that moment, she finally understood. There was no escaping this. Danica Rhodes sat in the cold, sterile courtroom, her wrists shackled, her face stripped of the confidence she once carried. Gone were the designer dresses, the flawless hair, the carefully curated image. Now, she was just another defendant in a jumpsuit, waiting for judgment. The prosecution wasted no time. "This is not a case of simple neglect," the district attorney said, his voice steady, unwavering. This was a deliberate decision. This woman, this mother, chose luxury over responsibility. She left her 2-year-old child alone, with no food, no care, no chance of survival. She was gone for a full week. A week. He let the words settle. Had law enforcement arrived even a few hours later, we would be trying her for murder. Danica's throat tightened, but she kept her expression blank. Cameras were everywhere. Reporters, spectators, a jury of 12, all waiting to hear her fate. Her defense attorney tried to soften the damage. "Ms. Rhodes made a terrible mistake," he argued. "She was overwhelmed, a single mother with no support, no guidance. She acted recklessly, yes, but she did not intend for her child to suffer." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Intent. The jury didn't seem convinced. Then came the final blow. The prosecution presented photographs. Images of Danica on a yacht, champagne in hand. Danica in designer stores, bags stacked at her feet. Danica in a private suite, draped in silk, sipping a cocktail. All time-stamped during the exact days her child lay helpless on the floor of a locked apartment. The jury flinched. Danica felt the weight of their judgment before the verdict was even read. It took them less than 2 hours to decide. On the charge of child abandonment resulting in critical endangerment, guilty. A sharp gasp cut through the room. Danica's head dropped, her heart pounding. The judge's voice was final. For your actions, you are sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Danica collapsed forward, a broken sob ripping from her throat. She had chased a life of wealth, of freedom, of power, and now she would never be free again. Danica Rhodes had spent her whole life chasing the dream, a life without limits, without struggle, without responsibility. She believed she was destined for something greater, that she was meant for luxury, for influence, for the kind of power that didn't require hard work or sacrifice. She got her wish, but not in the way she imagined. Instead of penthouses, she got a prison cell. Instead of designer heels, a pair of state-issued shoes. Instead of exclusive clubs, a cement courtyard surrounded by razor wire. Her daughter? She survived. But the damage had been done. The malnutrition, the trauma. It would take years to heal. Now the question remains, was justice served? Some believe Danica got exactly what she deserved. She made a choice, and she paid the price. A mother who could walk away from her child for an entire week. Should she ever get the chance to be free again? But others argue that life in prison is too harsh. That she was young, irresponsible, caught up in a toxic culture that worships money and image. That she didn't intend to kill her child, only to escape a life she never wanted. So what do you think? Should Danica have received a lesser sentence? Do you believe justice was served? Or do you think the system failed her just as much as she failed her child? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear from you. And if you found this case as shocking as I did, hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe for more true crime stories that expose the truth behind human nature. Turn on notifications so you never miss a case, because sometimes the most unbelievable stories are the ones that are real.